The common thread in where I then ended up in is curiosity. This technology, it seems smart as a human, but actually it's not. It just predicts the next word. Try to understand it from the fundamentals. It will help you in adoption, how you work with it. It will give you agency over it. Now, way more people, I'd say, 10, 20, 30% more of the people will become creators, right?
Yeah.
Because they just want to scratch their own itch.
Hello everyone, I'm Pete and welcome to Generating, Mediazoo's AI podcast that explores creativity, technology and AI and the impact it's having on how we work, live and interact. So I'm incredibly delighted today to be joined by Selim Benayt. Hello.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. I've been looking forward to this moment since we first met on that flight to Berlin.
Yes, same for me actually. You teased your podcast and I was like, we should do that.
Yeah, no, it's been great getting to know you, understanding more about your journey, and now I get to bring it to everybody.
Yeah.
So tell us about your journey. You've had a very sort of squiggly career, as I might describe it.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about yourself and sort of where your journey started and how you arrived at nothing.
Yeah, I guess the squiggly line started somewhere in Switzerland. I'd say somewhere between Basel and Zurich. Where at the time I was studying biophysics. So it started off actually studying biochemistry in a way first, genetics, and sort of that world of the cell and that world sort of proteins and how they behave inside of these microscopic spaces kind of started to bring me closer to the physics, so the underlying force of chemistry. And I happened to then bounce into a professor who was doing cancer research using a microscope that previously was only used by physicists to understand the rigidity of graphite. It was called atomic force microscope. And the interesting part about that microscope was there was no optical means to look at your specimen, but rather you would look at a deflection of a cantilever while that cantilever taps on this hard surface. And so the brilliance of that professor was we should use it to actually just tap into singular cancer cells and just see how rigid or how soft a cancer cell is. And that got me fired up to sort of join his team. And that then led to me sort of doing that research, breast cancer research at the time, using that microscope and understanding sort of the forces that cancer cells have if they're benign or malignant. And so, yeah, that's why I mastered actually in biophysics.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So it's a great purposeful start to your career. And then how did that lead on to other things? I mean, you get into AR.
Yeah. So I think the common thread in where I then ended up in is, I guess, curiosity. I was just always interested in how things work and trying to deconstruct them to their sort of literally atomic level. And so after having spent time on that breast cancer project, I moved over to Zurich, to the ETH University at the time, and bumped into a whole range of people that were working on the most incredible technological stuff. And I'm like, wow, I want to be part of that world, because sort of previously I was part of the world of a laboratory where you were sit in and you would do your pipetting and your protocols. And sure, you had your moments of brilliance when you looked at sort of the outcome of your experiments, but it felt sort of like a smaller universe. And then when I got to Zurich, met all of these people from all across the world, that really started to expand my horizon. And I just wanted to be part of that creative class across science, but also just the arts and entertainment. And so I ended up joining a group at the Wyss Center at the time. Wyss, a famous Swiss billionaire who set up a foundation, and he basically pledged a lot of money to the ETH University in Zurich. And there I started basically my work in robotics, in autonomous systems, trying to understand how cameras perceive the world. Why did I choose that? It felt right time, right place. It felt like cameras are becoming more than just tools for taking pictures, because they're associated to like mini computers. And so it felt like it's this sensor expansion in a way, because previously computers were attached to a desktop, and even further, as we all know, obviously attached to a room. And the moment where you could walk around with it and add new sensors, that computing power all of a sudden became something much more powerful, potentially much more creative. And so the ability for us to perceive the world, not just in an image, but associated to an accelerometer, a gyroscope, and any other sort of 3D capability, was just felt like it's the right place to be, and the right place to invest my energy. And so that then led to me exploring the world of augmented reality at the time, sort of a nascent space. That then led to a company that then later was acquired. And so I basically started with an own project, then somehow ended up doing a startup, because quite honestly, the environment at ETH was, they pushed me to think bigger, to dare something new that others haven't dared to do today. And so, yeah, that was a wonderful journey. And I think sort of the common thread, curiosity, giving it your all, kind of, and then trying to sort of satisfy that curiosity, I think led me to where I am today.
Fascinating. Yeah. It's great. And so often curiosity is a single point that people need to engage with all the time. They need to develop their own sense of curiosity, but it's really difficult for people in lots of different environments, I think, to constantly think about what's next when they're faced with what's in front of them today as a challenge. What do you do to spark your own curiosity, do you think? Is there a trick to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's sort of this balance between long-term vision in a way, and trying to understand where the world goes, and then really rooting it into today and into the now, right? And I think that's sort of the capability of like strong founders. They really can make that split happen between telling a big vision and then understanding the steps that it takes to get there. And I think for me, curiosity has a lot to do with just dreaming big, and personally understanding how society works, how our culture comes to be, why do we behave the way we behave. And I think that started very early in my life, I guess. My dad studied ethnology, anthropology, and he, at the time when I was young, had a very annoying look on life, constantly questioning stuff, and giving me like these philosophical reasons for why people behave the way they behave. And I was like, come on, Dad, like, you're exaggerating. But now, sort of further down the line, I think it sort of gave me a point of view on our culture and society, and how it behaves around technology, right? And so for me, technology, I'm not interested in technology for technology's sake. I'm more interested in how it shapes us as a community, as a society, as a group, moving through our world, right? So I'm much more interested in walking the streets, be it here in Europe or Asia or anywhere, and just trying to understand. Like, sometimes I literally just look at someone walking past, and I was like, how was their day like? How did they end up in front of me? What did it take for them? And I think that's just sort of how my brain was wired, and where my curiosity starts.
Nice. There's that constant curiosity about people and who they are and potentially what they need, right? When you start to think about
them.
and sort of think about the consumer technology, right? So you're working a lot with AI, with Nothing, sort of leading the way in AI technology and personalization for the users. How much of that is based on perception? Do you think you're perceiving what the user requires through AI technology, like the camera was perceiving in the past? Is there something within the way you perceive people, or AI perceives the user, that you're using in your practice?
Yeah, I think it all starts with sort of the person working with the technology. AI, there's this funny saying that I actually believe in. You only call it AI if it's not working. If it's working, you just call it software. And thereby, what I mean by that is AI is just yet another tool to allow you to create powerful, in that case, personal, dynamic, adaptable user experiences that just help a user or a person at the end of the day get something done with less friction, or drive towards the outcome that they want in better, easier ways. Right? And so I think that's sort of where I start my work. Right? I'm not thinking, oh, we have all of these AI tools out there. Which of these do I now take to build my new product? It's more like I look at what jobs need to be done. There's like a very famous framework in our tech world that's sort of called jobs to be done. And I think it's a fairly good framework because it just helps you break down sort of what the user actually wants to get done. And then you just drive towards that outcome, be it now with LLM capabilities or just like the raw compute that we have today, or is it with a fancy button that kind of wiggles when you tap it?
Yeah. Nice. So you have all these AI tools that you're working with, but you've also got an incredible team based in London, right? So what is it that the people bring to the problems that you're trying to solve that the AI tools can't, do you think?
Yeah, maybe to sort of ground the discussion briefly. So we're at Nothing. We set up our HQ in London and have multiple offices around the world. And basically what I'm responsible for at Nothing is the AI and services products team that goes across all of these geographies, as well as the software design teams. And we heavily invest into sort of the talent here in Europe because I believe London is this magical thin slice of the world in a way. You have all of the cultures coming together. And one of the advantages is you get people with tremendously different points of views into your team if you actually pay attention when you hire, right? And that's what I love about it. Like we have engineers talking about the raw compute that we need, or the CPU sort of allocation that we would need for XYZ feature, with a brand creative that sort of is more focused on the emotion that we need to invoke when someone taps a button, right? And the fact that we can have these discussions across culture, across language, and across skill set in the same room, I think is tremendously beneficial and powerful for us at Nothing.
Yes, it's hugely important, isn't it? The diversity that you can have within the team.
Yes, and you could also see it in a way of it's sort of this island that we build as a company, or every company is sort of an island. And the analogy we would be using with my previous startups, it's sort of we're an island of misfits in a way, and that's why we build our own. But I believe Nothing is very similar, right? It started as a startup 4.5 years ago, and now I think we've reached a unicorn status, so we're worth $1 billion. At the end of the day, though, it's a startup. 4.5 years old. A lot of people came together very quickly. And so we need to invest into this culture. We need to create this in-person culture, for instance. We need to create this culture of healthy discussion. And I think that's why London is also so interesting to us.
Amazing. Do you think there's a risk with AI that it will create this sort of unity of thought, that we won't have enough diversity? So people may be relying on AI to solve problems, but actually it's that diversity of thought that really matters.
To an extent, yes. Funny enough, that's what I keep telling my dad. My dad is an author, and he started to use GPT to sort of help him think through his book. And when he discovered GPT, so my dad is 82 years old, and so he discovered GPT not that long ago, maybe a year ago. And I told him, Dad, just be careful, because as an author, your fingerprint and your point of view is what's going to make your book, and it's going to make art, right? And if you constantly check in with GPT, I think it's going to, dilute your fingerprint and probably flatten your expression in a way. Because again, it's sort of, the LLM's the average of what is out there. And so in a way, I personally do believe, yes, that if there is an over-reliance on specifically, the chatbots that we have out there, the LLMs that are most commonly used, I do believe there is risk of flattening and averaging out great ideas. And so that's why I'm a firm believer in taste, opinion, craft, right? And maybe to bring it back to what we talked about, briefly touched on before, it's sort of this creative struggle, I think, that is very important in any creative industry, right? I think we all know like that feeling of push and pull inside of your own body when you're just at the cusp of finding the answer to a very difficult problem. And sometimes all it takes is a walk or a weekend in the woods and you struggling with yourself trying to sort of find an answer to that. And I think there's tremendous value in struggle. If you never struggle, I think you can create something of importance, to be honest.
Absolutely. Without that struggle, you're never really going to learn. That sort
Correct.
of the zone between panic and sort of comfort zones,
Yeah.
and actually pushing yourself out of it to actually,
Yeah.
hone a new skill or
Correct.
develop a new craft. Yeah, it's tremendously
So
important.
checking in with AI through that process, fine, right? But I believe, and that's how we build products at Nothing, our AI products. The human is always in the center of things, right? It's the human is always sort of basically AI is here to empower the person, the human, right? Elevate them to their true creative self, right? Help them sort of see past the mundane, right? That's what I use AI for a lot. It's just like, give me the cultural sort of streams that are important in that specific idea that I have. Let me know about sort of what drives that part of society in a way. And then they answer with certain just aspects of cultural importance. That then sort of helps me to organize my thought and then sort of use that to synthesize the next step, right? Once you synthesize the next step, sure, check in again, right? So have that discussion, but make sure to push. What is the story behind the story? What is sort of that narrative that you want to uncover? Right?
Yeah, what is the task that needs to be done?
Right.
I think there's some great reports out that demonstrate the learning industry is using AI for a lot of that sort of the idea generation and working through the challenges. But we're still potentially still doing the same thing we've always done. How important to you is innovation and doing things differently?
I mean, the easy answer is very important. I think nuance comes in. I'm allergic to the idea of doing something different just to be different. And I think this can happen very easily, right? You just want to do the other thing. But if there's no underlying narrative that you're driving, no underlying understanding of that job that needs to be done, or understanding of just the foundational thing that you want to tackle and thereby need difference in your experience, I think the outcome will be mediocre, right? And so at Nothing, I think we have a point of view onto society, onto the world, onto the market, onto our category, which is phones, audio, watch, and we just relentlessly push that opinion and that narrative that we have, right? And it takes courage, and so I think innovation is sort of that one struggling at the edge of something that just is becoming possible, and then having sort of the chutzpah to actually push through sort of maybe the pushback of a market, or that you're not just yet another flat surface with 3 cameras on the back, right? That sort of takes courage, right? And holding that courage, holding your opinion, and that being driven by a foundational understanding that others might not have, is for me sort of innovation, or at least part of innovation. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Chutzpah is a brilliant way to put it. I think you absolutely need that, and particularly in a learning industry that sort of struggles to find a seat at the table. I think there is a need to really claim a responsibility for purpose and use of technology in the right way, and to do things completely differently that people won't expect. And then you gain that respect, you gain further opportunities to do things completely differently.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's a really important focus. Chutzpah, courage and curiosity. That's a
Yeah.
good one.
There you go.
So tell us about the challenges, right? So you're building a 3rd, 4th generation of the phone at Nothing. So that's a key part of what you're doing, right?
Yeah. I mean, the challenges are across the board, right? Obviously, as a company, there are challenges when it comes to the hardware. There are challenges when it comes to the software product. Then there are challenges of the company, which is building the actual company. So organizational challenges, which is people challenges, geography challenges, policy challenges. So I think it's never-ending challenges when you build a company at that sort of cultural relevance or that scale. When it comes to sort of my daily challenges, I think that's somewhere in between building up an organization and being visionary, long-term, strategic enough, and at the same time being tremendously focused on the execution, on day-to-day execution. And I think if we sort of start with the organizational challenges, we need to sort of take a step back and understand, again, nothing is very young. And we have market demand that sort of brings the necessity of scaling teams across different time zone cultures and team sizes, basically. And so here in London, what we do is building up a software team. And that's almost for the first time. There was a small team of a couple of people that sort of was doing creative exploration in software, but there was no true software team. And so building up that team in isolation seems easy. It's like I get sort of the push by Carl, founder of Nothing, to go and hire people and sort of create a culture around that, right? A culture of sort of velocity and sort of being determined to push something out quickly. However, that's only in isolation. If you look at the broader company, you're going to face sort of a culture that already exists, which is a culture of building tremendously great hardware products that sort of defined themselves by an underlying narrative that was very controllable because it's hardware. And hardware has long lead times, meaning hardware side of the business can talk to the marketing side of the business. And with long lead times before. And so marketing has tremendous sort of room to craft that narrative and then push it to market in coherence. Software is a different beast because it's very fast. The beauty about software is actually the polar opposite to what hardware is. It's very moldable, very easily to change and adapt. And you have to lean into the strengths of the given medium that you're working with. Right? And the strengths of the medium of software is you push it today and you can change it by the evening if you want to. Right? And so as a team, we need to lean into that strengths because otherwise you can't compete. And so that leads to sort of different rhythms, different cadences within our company. And that then might lead to cultural differences of teams. And that actually means communication differences. Right? And so that's sort of one huge bucket of challenges that I kind of need to face on a daily basis. How do I build that up and keep the coherence of the company? And then two, when it comes to sort of the software itself, so the software product itself, I think the main challenge is to understand what today is truly relevant, what will sort of still be relevant tomorrow, and then have that patience to drive towards that with sort of a craft quality of the product that makes it stand out in the market, right? So having that split between, again, the long-term vision and strategy of what we want to do, and then sort of keeping up the drumbeat for the team, for them to execute, right? Because it all starts at the top. If I don't hold the drumbeat, the team, no matter how good they are, they will also not sort of follow, right? And so that's sort of, I think, a huge, huge challenge because everything happens at warp speed, right? And sometimes being able to zoom out and see far enough while everything else is cooking at the same time, the stove, playing it like a piano, I think is a big challenge of my day-to-day, yeah.
There's a fascinating insight in there, thinking around software and the ability to just republish and do the updates. Whereas I think a lot of the time in this industry, there's a big, you're sort of publishing software, but it acts like hardware, that it never changes and it's rigid and it will only get an update in 3 years maybe. But there's so much scope, I think, with new technologies to be able to do things at a different speed with a broader ambition around solving bigger challenges rather than just the immediacy of delivering a module, right? Which tends to happen quite a lot. But thinking around how can we use the AI tools to constantly publish updates based on the emerging needs or emerging trends. And interesting. I'm glad you've got policy challenges, because that's probably the biggest challenge for most of the people, is around compliance, right? And making sure that you've got this always on compliance offer that ticks the box, makes sure we're all doing the right thing. And I think within that, there's this opportunity to create really adaptive, personalized, contextualized even experiences for people in different areas of a business to not just tick their box on compliance, but start to understand them as well and do things differently. So nice thought. I wonder, I mean, we talk about the abstract, but this is phone technology, right? It's the new way to interact with phones, and you're taking a small bite out of Apple's market.
Yeah, we are. And I think for us, the most exciting part about this AI wave is the underlying sort of force of AI, which is, for the first time, it's technology that is actively adapting to what it is seeing. So it is actively learning and remodeling itself to what it is experiencing. To put it in another way, you can launch something today, and tomorrow, given the right sensors and just right input methods, it will have understood you as a person much more. That might sound creepy for some, and for others, it might sound helpful, right? To create truly personal user experiences in a way. That's what's so fascinating to me. And sort of one of the leading pillars of my product work is centered around personalization and adaptiveness, the context. And how I summarize this is more around the idea of collapsing the gap that you might have today in certain software experiences between the action a user wants to take and the actual outcome. And that gap today might mean opening different apps and then somehow juggling between the apps, and you, the user, all of a sudden becoming an orchestrator of apps, or clicking yourself through within an app, multiple clicks and swipes and scrolls to get to the outcome that you need. Calling a cab, for instance, multiple clicks, multiple tabs to find the location, right? And so to me, one pillar of what we're doing has everything to do about collapsing that gap between intent and outcome. The intent of the user, what does the user want to achieve, and the outcome they would like to see. And for the first time, we can actually really try to make that gap vanish, right? For the first time, I think we're on a trajectory. If you look at the light cone of technology, like where we're headed, it feels like that's going to be possible because software starts to truly understand someone, given the input parameters that we give it, to reduce friction, to reduce that gap to zero.
Yeah, I love that. Basically, we're still going after clicks, right? Nothing has changed in good UX, still going after the clicks. And reducing that meaningless friction, that's definitely has to be the objective.
Yeah, that's right. And on top of that, maybe to double down on the product pillars, we talked about personalization, adaptiveness, context. That for nothing also means to go across our device ecosystem. Right? I think the tremendous power of nothing is that we're the owner of a device ecosystem. We have not only super cool phones, but also tremendous audio products, be it over ears or buds. We have watches, and building software that goes across that entire ecosystem, not siloed, basically, is a tremendous advantage, right? Because we can build memory systems or systems that start to understand the user across all of these different form factors, and thereby tying back to the very beginning of our conversation, sort of tying these different sensors together. Because all of a sudden, if you have this powerful technology that can adapt to new unseen environments, I think one of the advantages is that you can now give it even more sensors. What if it's not just cameras, but obviously microphones and biometric data, like all of these different sensors. You can sort of tie it together into a composite sensor in a way if you own the ecosystem. And then thereby create much more relevant contextual experiences for these users. Right?
Nice. I think a lot of people would love to own the full ecosystem, but they're probably struggling with that.
Yes.
How important is MCP for you? Is it all? I mean, is it the same system, the same model every time? So you're not worried about that. But are you? I guess are you integrating other models that MCP becomes a requirement, or is it all in that one model?
Yeah, good question. I think for us, AI work has a lot to do with orchestration, so model orchestration. Because I believe in owning the memory layer, which is the layer we now just talked about, which is basically longitudinal understanding of the user. That means an understanding of the user or the person over time, right? Because context is nothing more than sort of a temporal understanding of the user over many timestamps. And so owning that memory layer, I think, is rather important for us. Then on top of it, we have an orchestrator. And that's what we just alluded to with MCP connections and whatnot. The orchestrator really sort of sits in between the memory layer and then sort of an execution or communication layer. And I call it the communication layer because basically the orchestrator, which is intelligence, sort of needs to understand what signals at what time are going to be important to communicate up towards another more visual or audio layer that then transfers sort of the outcome that the user in that moment demanded. Right? And so for us, owning this entire stack is obviously paramount. And specifically for the orchestration layer, owning that orchestration logic is rather important for us. And the reason is owning orchestration logic feels like it's going to be the layer that captures most of the value in the future. And I'm saying this because I started to think about a concept of thin clients. And a thin client to me is sort of the idea that hardware gets reduced to basically being a capturing device. And capturing meaning you capture sort of the intent of the user. So the user takes out that hardware device because they want, again, a job to be done. And that hardware piece will not have enough compute in the coming years, at least, will not have enough compute to sort of really resolve that action to the outcome on device. And so by the nature sort of that game, it means you probably need to orchestrate or then escalate sort of that intent resolution to the cloud and to the big model providers, right?
Yep.
And so if you don't want to forego all of the value to the big model provider and to the big cloud provider, you somehow need to be the person who dictates where that intent is going to be wired to, routed to, right? And so there's tremendous power in being the orchestrator, right? And that goes back to your question about MCPs, right? If you're the orchestrator, it's up to you to start to understand which MCP to invoke when, which service to call when, right? And there obviously is arbitrage value to be gained, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating model to think about, that memory layer and an orchestration layer, and how that can then benefit people. I mean, as an end user using a phone versus then within a business and what we're actually trying to get done, and so the multiple tasks that people are trying to achieve in a very complex tech stack that is not singular at all. As much as Microsoft may be dominant, there's still so many different players at play for most people.
Props to Microsoft, though. They're doing a good job.
Yeah, they do a good job. Yeah. I guess I wonder then about, so you got users in the playground, right, as well on the phone today.
Yeah.
And they're creating their own experiences and building out their own apps within the phone itself, right, to create their own personalized experience. There's another layer of the user, right, that you've created a space for on the system as well.
Yeah. Thanks for touching on that. I think that's something I'm very passionate about, because so the playground is currently our platform where we truly celebrate the creativity of our community. It's a platform that hosts today our camera presets, which is on your Nothing phone. We have something called presets where you can basically swipe up and then select, quote unquote, a live filter that then changes the way you take a picture or video. Could be a cold filter, could be a stretch filter, just something cool that we kind of believe in.
Seen a couple on the site. It's like Lost in Translation that someone set
There
up,
you go.
so everything looks
Yeah,
like that film.
correct. There you go. And so we host that on Playground, and there are hundreds of these filters. Then we host something called Glyph Toys, because our phone 3 has a matrix, a glyph matrix at the backside, which is basically a small LED screen that can host toyful interactions, playful interactions. Then there is audio equalizers, because our audio products, I think, are known for their good sound, and so we want to allow people to tune their own sound. And so they can have their own equalizer sets. On top of that, there is now a new category that we call essential apps, which, how you just described it, are basically apps developed by the community that run specifically on our phone 3s. And the cool thing about it is we give you a tool to the user, we give them a tool to build these apps using natural language. And so for the keen listener, they probably understood that's a so-called vibe coding environment. Vibe coding is basically the idea of, instead of using developer speak to develop something, engineering speak, they can just use plain English. They basically say, create me an app that tracks Formula One results in XYZ style, in the Microsoft style, or in the nothing style. And that vibe coder will then basically create the code in whatever language is needed, and literally just shows the end user that app. The cool thing is now that the user can just deploy that app onto their own phone or share it with friends. I could share it with you. And so I think the underlying force is that the cost of creation, the cost of making your idea become real, tangible, experience your own ideas, has dropped tremendously, which is super cool. I think now way more people, I'd say, 10, 20, 30% more of the people will become creators, right?
Yeah.
Because they just want to scratch their own itch. And previously it was just tremendously difficult. You needed to learn this new language, some programming language,
Yep.
and then somehow understand maths and like be a very logical person to create sort of an experience to share with others. And today, so that cost really shrank, right? And so the market dynamics changed, meaning now developers don't need a market of 10 million people to justify their time put into developing something. It can be a market of 1. It can be a market of 10, because actually the time of creating something shrank to almost meaningless amounts of time in a way.
Yeah.
Right.
And you must have put some parameters around that then, in terms of what's possible. You couldn't create its own bug to take down the whole ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
So there's some good, robust parameters in there.
That's true.
But I wonder, for people that are struggling to sort of get AI adoption in their organization, people that look at a task and think, well, I could do this quicker with AI, but what if it doesn't work? And I've wasted all my time, and actually I just need to get the job done, so I'm going to get it done this way, without setting up something more positive, usable, shareable for future. Maybe they don't feel they've got the permission. Maybe they don't feel like they've got the capability. I guess I wonder what advice you might have for people in that context, struggling with all the legacy systems and the challenges and security concerns that you might not have.
Yeah, it's a good question. I obviously speak from a position sort of privilege where I can just try these things, right? And if it doesn't work, I scratch it and just try again. And I understand there are other people in very real environments where they can't just adopt the newest technology and do whatever they want on their laptops or computers, right? I guess my advice would be still just try it in your off time, for instance. If you can't do it at work, try it at home. Try it on your way back to your house or on a weekend, right? Just use your free time in a way to explore, because it will eventually make its way into every organization. And then sort of being the person who already played with it, understands it from the ground up, I think is tremendously helpful. For instance, that's what I told my dad. The first thing when we started to speak about AI, I told him, you need to understand this technology is not like it seems like smart as a human, but actually it's not. It just predicts the next word, right? And just be sort of aware of that. So, understanding sort of the technology, any technology that you work with, try to understand it from the fundamentals. I think it will help you in adoption, how you work with it. It will give you agency over it rather than just surrendering your agency to it. Right?
Nice. And with all all the devices you've got, you're able to get a lot of granular information, I'd say, around a user. So even their heartbeat, how they're thinking and feeling potentially.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not saying you are, saying you are, but potentially you've got all these different data points you could capture to make something really, really special. Yeah. What do you think the most important data points to capture? If you were wanting to predict someone's needs, I guess. Hang on, let me think about this. Mm-hmm. If you were trying to, if you were looking to create something personalized and contextual for an individual user, and you wanted to capture, just five data points about the user to create something really rich experience for them, what would those be?
Good question. I think the way we look at it is time is probably one of the most important ones. Sort of the temporal aspect. What is someone doing when? I think that's really interesting to us. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, maybe let me take a step back. What do we try to achieve? Generally, we try to understand someone's day in a way so that we can help them be more successful at what they would like to achieve. And success can be defined in different ways. Success could be professional, could be in your hobby, could be a better partner. So that's sort of how we look at success, right? And so I think that's what we try with our AI features, with our essential features. We try to drive towards that. How can we make someone more successful in their day? And if that is sort of the goal, I think understanding someone's day and the motivations within that day is critical, right? And so sort of obviously the temporal aspect is important. The location is important. Probably the different interactions that someone is taking with their different devices at different times is important. So I'd say there's a lot of noise out there, which is another challenge. How do you differentiate sort of noise from signal? So I can't give you like 5 specific things that we're looking for, but definitely, yeah, like time, location, interaction patterns. What are they telling us that they find important? Because we have search functions on the phone, for instance. So what are they sort of searching for? Why? What is the outcome? Then we have a feature called Essential Space, which is associated with a hardware button on the side of the phone, where you can literally just capture a screen or a voice note or a picture and save it into your space. So that's very high signal over noise, right? So these are sort of the data points that we're currently looking at, trying to recreate someone's day and thereby then trying to infer what do they want to achieve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's massive. Trying to drive the success of an individual. I think that ultimately what everyone in the L&D and performance space is trying to achieve is ultimately trying to find that. But and very often it's interesting you start with time, because time is the biggest barrier to people ever engaging with learning. First is time, and then the next is line managers, right? They don't want people to learn. They want them to be doing the job and being successful without the need to learn. Yeah. But I think
goes
that's
back to struggle. If you don't struggle, probably you won't learn.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly. And that ability to read what people are really struggling with and get all that information in, I think we could move it to a place where that should be available. You should be able to capture those things. But too often people have just ditched whatever the business is providing them and gone out to the internet. It's effectively like a dark web for when you have a learning ecosystem. Everyone's just out Googling stuff and jumping on YouTube to find out how to do things. So you lose all that data. And so I think there is this sort of the need to try and capture a lot of that to be able to drive better experiences. So there's probably a lot of envious people thinking about the data points and all that stuff you can capture.
I mean, again, like one of the reasons why I signed with Nothing, next to it being just, to me, a culturally relevant company, which is something I want to spend my time on, is the fact that we own a tremendously powerful entry point, the phone, right? Like it feels like our lives revolve around that sort of piece of glass. And so owning that, and at the same time owning other sort of sensors around your body, is just, it's a great position to be in for the next wave of technology. And again, I believe so because for me, the true strength of that new wave of AI is that it can make sense of the unknown in a way. It can adapt to it, and thereby, unleashing it into the real world by giving it sensors, entry points, feels a good position to be in.
Yeah, definitely. And well, thankfully, Microsoft are in a good position. And so a lot of people are engaging with Copilot, and I guess more and more questions being asked of that system, getting more and more information back. And I guess it's how you then treat that information, what you're doing with it as a professional to think about the needs of the business. But I think the time of day thing is also really critical. There should be within the Microsoft ecosystem, enough data from when people are logging on. Maybe some people are leaving early, but they're logging back on at night. All of these really interesting points around when people want to be productive and actually when they might have a space to engage with something new that stretches them and pushes them. But a lot of it is cultural, I think, for a lot of organizations.
I think for Microsoft, again, I think obviously everyone agrees Satya is a legend. The way he's currently navigating Microsoft, and I think what they're truly strong at is capturing sort of relevant context or data across someone's professional lives. I think that's very powerful. You understand who they are at work.
Yeah.
And I think obviously with the move of semi-acquiring or not, or just buying a big stake in GPT, in OpenAI, I think obviously they now move beyond just the work aspect, right? Tremendously so. I think people would be surprised to see what everyone shares with their GPT, right, in a way. And so obviously that's a huge moat that they start to build up. And it's not a coincidence that obviously Johnny Ive and Sam Altman now start to work together for a new form factor. Right. Obviously, one of the reasons I assume is they need more context. Context is king across every part of someone's life, professional, personal, right? And thankfully, there are still a lot of moments in our lives where we are not at work, right? Where we chill on the sofa or maybe go for a walk, which I like to do. And that's context that you would be missing if you do not have peripheral devices, which is another way of saying if you do not have sensors who are able to capture that environment and then make sense of it, right? And so I think Microsoft or Satya or whoever sort of is in charge of that obviously saw this a long way coming, and hence why they've been so aggressive in starting to invest and expand in all of these areas.
Yeah, interesting. But it's a lot of data that some people are quite scared of sharing, and they don't really want to release some of that information and therefore get the best, potentially to get the best support in achieving whatever they're trying to achieve. Where do you think that leaves people? Should we all be giving away as much data as possible to become the best humans we could possibly be? Or do you think there is still that need to be a bit concerned over what AI can do with our data and the risks for us as humans, and then for the wider society, or even just for a business?
Yeah, it's obviously a question we think about a lot at Nothing, and also me personally, sort of privacy and security, right? What I start to notice, and I'm not going to grade it good or bad, what I start to notice is that people become more comfortable in sharing a lot of personal information if it leads to a betterment of their situation. And betterment could be they actually feel better because they shared some heartache that they had, and whatever LLM was out there, whatever AI experience was out there could help them get over it or just deal with it. Or it could be driving that meeting outcome. And thereby you share the entire corpus of knowledge of your entire company into that LLM, and it helps you sort of perform better. So what I want to say is it feels like that the determining factor of giving away your personal data is the delta that you can achieve in the outcome if you actually do it. So what is the outcome that you're going to achieve by not sharing? And then what is the outcome you're going to achieve by sharing your personal data? And if that delta, that gap is big enough, I think people start to be more willing to give up their data. It feels like there starts to be an understanding that data will be collected no matter what, by the hyperscalers or by other smaller companies, and people start to be more comfortable with that idea, depending what the company is. Obviously, there are cultural aspects are going to play into it, depending where you grow up and how you've been indoctrinated to see or look at certain companies. But in general, I think there is a movement towards being more comfortable in that way if the outcome is actually better than when not sharing.
Yeah, so sort of putting that sell in so people really understand the value.
Correct.
Is probably critical for everybody.
Correct. That doesn't mean, just to double down, that doesn't mean you do not need to do your work in security.
Yeah.
Privacy,
Yeah.
right? That just actually means privacy and security have now, not just by Apple, but also by others, by us, by everyone else probably in the industry, have been elevated to first-class citizens when it comes to creating your product pillars, when it comes to sort of telling or operating within teams to build products. Privacy and security are now, strong pillars in how you have to think about getting that job done for a user.
Yeah, absolutely. That compliance aspect is going to be a huge part of it.
Yeah.
I also wonder about the battle for IP in the future, and if you're giving away your sort of or everything you've learned in your career to AI to create the sort of thing that will replace you. I still think that's a huge fear for lots of people. What are your views on that and the sort of the fight for IP in future?
I think my point of view is more focused on the idea of fear of replacement. Today, I believe, again, going back to that creative struggle, to having an opinion, to being the editor-in-chief, in a way, of your own thinking and the outcomes that you want to deliver to others and to yourself. I think AI is tremendously powerful there, and probably not as much as a replacement force as people might think. It just allows sort of you as a person to be more empowered. Again, be it at work. I think we sort of tend to see AI a lot sort of in just that professional aspect, because again, I think work, the professional world has rules that AI is just very good at, which is you need to deliver X, Y, Z by that date, and then it gets graded by someone or by the market or by the user. And so that's why I think we tend to sort of naturally look at AI in that aspect of someone's life. But just generally, I think AI is a tremendously empowering force, and it can sort of help you get stuff done quicker, with less friction, with just more clarity, with more precise view of what someone is actually trying to achieve. And so I think that's the exciting part about it, right? I truly believe the replacement risk sure is here, but it feels like it's overplayed in a way.
Yeah, because ultimately humans and diverse thoughts still provide that
Correct.
differentiating factor.
Correct. It's how you use AI, right? To go back to that, don't give up agency, right? Use the agency that you have and to truly drive and help with your thinking, and thereby sort of edit the outcome that you want to achieve to something greater, right?
Yeah, amazing. Selim, this has been a great discussion. We've covered that curiosity, courage, and compliance being essential parts of what will drive innovation in future. And I think there's been a lot of food for thought definitely for me, the things that we're trying to achieve at Mediazoo, and hopefully for everybody else that's listening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, no, it's been good. And hopefully we'll get to see where nothing goes and continued innovation, and maybe get you back on the pod in future and see how things are progressing.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. So thanks again for joining us. Remember to share the podcast, like and subscribe, and all the other wonderful stuff. And good luck on your AI adventures. Thanks very much.